Hello, I am Elena Metzger, and I am a PhD student for Instructional Design and Technology at Liberty University. And today I would like to talk to you about optimizing cognitive load management in multimedia chemistry education. A little bit of background about me. I am a chemistry instructor, senior instructor at Missouri State University, and I have been for the last 10 years. I started my journey on instructional design last spring in March of 2023, and I've been fascinated by the tools to enhance chemistry education, and I've been very humbled and engaged with the opportunity to apply this specific project into making my students' learning experience be suitable for their cognitive load management. So let's go ahead and take a look. What are some of the things that we should expect? We're going to talk about, initially, we're going to talk about how multimedia is used to enhance chemistry education, chemistry learning. We're going to talk about the implications of using multimedia and how it is connected to cognitive load in order to better address some of the observations that I've done or the adjustments that I've done. We will then talk about the cognitive load framework and how specific it is to the areas that it is addressed to, right? And then I thought that in order to make this much more meaningful as a learning experience, I would take some of the course materials that I use in my class and evaluate them to see how they stand within those cognitive load management specific details, and then just go for it and give it a try. This is where you as a listener gets to see how well it was implemented, and if you have any comments or any observations, I will definitely welcome them. Let's go ahead and get started. So when it comes to enhancing chemistry learning, we use videos and multimedia to enhance that learning through the visual representations. It allows us to bring real world applications into a very abstract world, which is the chemistry world. Chemistry is the study of matter. And in that process, because we're looking at very small things, and we're asking humans that are learning about chemistry to make connections, and chemistry itself has an intrinsic high cognitive load demand, right? So multimedia has been used. Magnum and Sithler have pointed out that there are specific uses that is given, and some of the best uses are related to, first, the visual representations. I would like to make a note that every example of pictures that have been added into this presentation are example of materials that I use in my courses. A while ago, I came across the PHET, which is these animations created by the University of Colorado, and they allow to have this interactive media tool to help visualize different concepts. It is a free resource, and it can be used and shared as a link, or it can be used and shared as a embedded content. The use of this type of multimedia tool allows to create this captivating multimedia resource that brings complex concepts to life. It gives this hands-on approach, and it allows for the visualization of abstract materials. Once we move on from from those representations, we can look at that at the end when we are in the lectures and when we are having these materials available. It is important to focus as well on engaging learners. So this is where well-designed videos and multimedia will engage learners. Now, this is where it's very important that we start looking into what does that mean. We do live in a modern world where we think about engagement as entertainment, and engagement does not mean entertainment. This is very important. Engagement means that our students' cognitive abilities and cognitive capacity is available to engage into a learning experience. So while we do want to have enjoyable experiences, the most important part about engagement is for our students to be able to make that learning experience interactive, where they interact with the content, interact with the information that is presented, and make connections. So another use of multimedia in chemistry is to demonstrate experiments. Access to high quality STEM instructional videos has been studied, and it's an evidence-based initiative that enhances students and boosts performance and academic performance. The COVID-19 pandemic led to a lot of instruction in higher education to move online. And we started to see a mass production of videos. And while that is a great resource that we had to do at the time, it is important to make sure that the structure of the videos actually leads to enhance that learning experience. So the high quality portion of the STEM instructional video is important. Quality, though, is not just related to the equipment used and the video making skills, but since this is an educational resource, it also has to be linked with that cognitive load management that we will talk about. One of the most exciting things for me to do, I like to bring these experiment videos into the ability for students to have a closer look and be able to have these observations of chemical changes and make the connection between the theory that they're learning in lecture with the visual lab. In this example for here, we have, In this example here, we have a gas that this is sodium, this is nitrogen dioxide, and this can be very hard for us to breathe. So we really do not want our students to come this close to it, correct? So multimedia in the form of video here serves an opportunity to get a close look while staying safe. Of course, there is the hands-on experience of laboratory experiments. However, when it comes to observations and those connections that we want students to make, multimedia can help us bring safely those close-up looks to experimental work in order to guide the students into making those connections. This multimedia, the use of multimedia has been proven to help supplement instruction. So it allows us to look at multimedia in classrooms to bring in these learning resources and perspectives. A unique setting that I have, so this is a picture of some of my students in class, is that we have computers available, we have screens available, we have whiteboards available, and we have different opportunities in order to supplement instruction with multimedia. Of course, the use of PowerPoint presentations is widely used when teaching, especially in higher education. We have to make sure that the multimedia that we're coming and that they're bringing into the classroom does not become a detractor of that cognitive load that could hinder learning, right? So some of the observations that have been made is that while multimedia tools have an infinite potential to to help students be engaged, to help learning be more engaging and more accessible to digest, it poses a risk of overwhelming students and causing excessive cognitive load. So this is where multimedia, just for the sake of multimedia, for it to look nice, to feel nice, is not enough. When we're asking students to learn from it, it is important to take a look at the structure and the important elements that can lead to that. So in order to further talk about cognitive load, we're going to talk about the 3 different types of cognitive load that are presented in the theoretical framework of Meyer. And this has been a work that's been done since the early, I would say around 20th century, right? So we have like the 1998, and it's been a cognitive theory that has been developed through evidence-based research. So there is the 3 different types of cognitive load. We have the intrinsic cognitive load, we have the extraneous cognitive load, and the germane cognitive load. Let's take a quick look at each of them. So the intrinsic cognitive load is the inherent difficulty of the learning materials. This is important because, for the context of chemistry, for example, the complexity and novelty is outside of just the teaching strategies. It is related to the information and the knowledge that we're seeking students to teach. So the intrinsic cognitive load is what we have to work with, right? It means that I don't want to remove the rigor of the science and teaching in order to reduce cognitive load, right? But when I acknowledge that there is an inherent difficulty of learning the materials on the task, not just because of the student's own learning styles or learning habits, but also to the subject matter itself, then I'm able to understand that because of this complexity, I have to be able to help students with the way I present information in order to manage this intrinsic cognitive load. We cannot change it. It's right there. How do we address it? And how can we be intentional? Then we have, so this is, if we are not careful about how every single aspect of instruction, we're not intentional. And I'm not saying careful, I'm saying intentional. If we are not intentional, added to the intrinsic cognitive load, we can generate extraneous cognitive load. The extraneous cognitive load is that load that is imposed by the instructional design and the presentation of the learning materials. This is the part that you as an instructor have full control over, right? Because this is the part where you can acknowledge that intrinsic cognitive load and understand the complexity and the novelty. It's important, though, to understand the subject matter well in order to decide how I'm going to present that information, what activities I'm going to have students do that promotes or manages this the extraneous cognitive load, right? The other area or the other type of cognitive load is the germane cognitive load. This is the type of cognitive load that is associated with the effort, and this is important. The effort required for meaningful learning. This is where we have students apply. In the context of chemistry, this is where we focus on problem solving and critical thinking. The subject matter itself doesn't develop critical thinking, right? Going and attending a chemistry class does not necessarily, or being exposed to chemistry concepts does not develop critical thinking. So ultimately, we want the students to develop, right? And to work on this germane load, because this is what in the field of educational psychology, we're talking about this is what leads to long-lasting learning, right? So with these 3 this understanding of cognitive load and the three different types, we know that they're interconnected, and I cannot just focus on one at a time, right? So what do we find? And we find is that learners have limited cognitive resources for processing information. And this is the novelty of Myers' approach, is that we need to understand that there's a dual notion, a dual processing of learning, and it is the hearing and the auditory sensing, and then visual as well. So as our students are visually and hearing engaged, if I am overwhelming, or if I am requiring both of these processes to be taking place at the same time, I can be also causing this extraneous cognitive load. So overloading these resources can hinder learning and comprehension. So we want to be tactical. Now, what I do believe that is very important, and sometimes it gets lost in the translation of this cognitive load theory for multimedia learning, is that there is also that component of individual needs. We do have neurodivergency that we have to address when we're considering as well, and not just the material itself. While most learners we're all, and the way our brain processes information, and we have these different types of cognitive loads, taking a step back and making sure that we have reflective teaching practices can allow us to identify how we deal with this. However, we're no experts, and this is where maybe we can have students put that input into maybe materials that they may find to be to not help with learning. It shouldn't be just a one way where me as an instructor is making the decisions about how instruction happens, but a student-centered approach is also going to have that feedback from the students and get a better understanding of what do they enjoy. And the interesting part to me is that when students talk about what they enjoyed about a class, and if we ask them to be detailed, it can give us an insight into our instructional design and some changes that we may want to do, not just to satisfy them, because at that point, especially for higher education, you may not teach them again, but to get this better understanding of how also these learning materials are being perceived by students as well, right? Okay, so what are these strategies to reduce extraneous load and promote germane load, right? So Meyer also provide us with with strategies that we can use, how to be intentional and how we can manage that cognitive load, right? Remember that we're talking about reducing the extraneous load and promoting germane load. We're not talking about the intrinsic cognitive load, because that is inherent to the subject matter. And especially in areas like chemistry, we do not want to reduce, for example, what needs to be learned and what needs to be taught, because this is important in the advancement of science. So we're going to focus on the areas that we can control, which is how do we reduce extraneous load and how do we promote germane load with the activities that we do, right? So let's look at each of them. I want you to take just a minute and think, as I propose and as I show different strategies, which one, if it is extraneous load or germane load, what does this activity help us, or what does this strategy help us manage? Take just a minute. We're going to read. There's a brief description. I will wait, and I will let you make that connection, okay? Perfect. Promoting active learning. So engaging learners in activities that require them to process and apply the information actively, such as problem solving, discussions, and self-explanation. Something that I like a lot is self-explanation. Oftentimes in tests, I would have students just a short answer where I have them explain a concept, not define the concept, but explain it. And this kind of activity promotes active learning. So Let's make sure this is the teacher in me, right? So do we have extraneous load, or do we have, or is this for germane load, right? So which strategy is this for? Yes, if you chose that this is associated with a germane load, it is true. So because this kind of activity is what helps the students make these connections, and we're not just introducing information to them, but we're helping them process that information actively and being engaged, right? Utilizing multimedia. So if we present information using both words and visual, we can facilitate dual coding, right? So, and by words, usually we're talking about this auditory portion, and the visual is connecting those dual coding, which is important to enhance understanding. So this can serve the both purposes, right? It can serve to reduce extraneous cognitive load, and it can also help to promote. In order to promote germane load, it cannot be a passive aggressive activity. So if I have multimedia, I want to entice the students to engage with it. And maybe if I have embedded questions in videos, if I take a moment and I pause and I have them think and reflect and then move on, that would be the optimal use of multimedia, where yes, I can use it strategically to promote to reduce that extraneous cognitive load, because I present the information and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. But what makes it be good multimedia or effective multimedia for cognitive load management? That is not enough. If we have students and we ask them to do something with it, this is where we gain so much that extra portion of it, which is the germane cognitive load. Reducing distractions. So when we're talking about reducing distractions, it's not about having a quiet room and having no distractions, like put your phone away or put this device away, but it's actually about how we present information. So it's minimizing irrelevant visuals or animations. If it doesn't have a purpose that is connected to the specific material that we're teaching, it shouldn't be there, right? When we have unnecessary information, we can divert the attention from the main learning goals. Now, this is where I think that it could be misinterpreted with not using engaging visuals. As you can see in my presentation, I use colors and I like things to look pleasing to the eye, but it is, we're going to talk in just a little bit about what that actually means in terms of reducing distractions. It doesn't mean we got to use black and white and no color. That's just where I'm going to put it there. We're getting there where we can look at that. The next part is providing guidance, and this providing guidance, it can be very easily overlooked, especially because we are teaching technology native students, right? So our Gen Z students, which have had mobile devices their entire life around them. However, oftentimes we could overlook providing explicit instructions about how to use multimedia resources effectively in our classrooms, because we assume that students should know how to do it. This can lead to causing our instruction in our classroom to not be equitable for every student, right? So when we offer explicit instructions about maybe our materials, when we have a new activity, we're not just going to make an announcement at the beginning of class. Maybe we follow that up with a written announcement, right? Something that students can make the connection between what they heard and what they read. This is part of making or helping students have that communication. If you're the kind of person that is very detailed in your syllabus, that's completely fine. How about we have a syllabus scavenger hunt where we say, did you gather the information that I was presented to you, right? Examples and worked out solutions. This is something that is often used, especially, for example, in chemistry. And what I do think is that just working out the solution or showing the work on how a problem is to be solved, if it has some mathematical considerations, may not be enough. Because while it makes sense and we lay it out to us, we need to understand what about this specific question that I'm asking you to work through, or what of this specific problem is the challenge. And when we are intentional and we identify where do students stumble usually, then that's how we know that as I show the worked solution, I'm going to highlight and emphasize those areas first. Simplifying and organizing instructional materials, how we present the information, using headings and bullet points. Now, there are aspects about making our materials accessible, and to be ADA compliant. And if I'm using headings, for example, using a heading just like the bold font is not enough, because maybe sometimes the screen readers are not going to be able to identify that. That's just a visual representation, but it's not actually in the instruction on how it is. So on Word or PowerPoint, if that's what you choose to use, you want to actually use the features as headings and titles and paragraph, so that the screen readers, for example, can identify and differentiate text depending on that structure and organization. Logical sequencing is also important. If we focus just on presenting information and we expect the students to make the connections between topic 1 and topic 2, as I'm talking about topic 3, if I just presented topic 1 50 slides before, and on topic 2, like 10 slides before, once we get to topic 3, we're asking them to make this and to retrieve information that, by the way, was just presented to them maybe a lecture before, to make this connection in order to bring it here. So providing a visual organization of that logical sequencing can actually also help enhance the effectiveness of our materials, right? These strategies are evidence-based practices that are proven or they're studied, and that we have the evidence that help to manage cognitive load. Before we go there, I want to take a look and just make sure that we're bringing it all back together. So in order to make this presentation more meaningful long-term and just kind of give it that purpose, I wanted to take an example of a slide that I use and have used before. And as I have been doing the literature review about cognitive load, I am a hands-on learner. I gotta be able to do it to make sense, to be able to visualize it and understand it. So just talking about this wouldn't be enough. I wanted to have that extra step of just going for it and analyzing my own instructional materials and the multimedia specific for an image, right, which is what a PowerPoint presentation is, and make that assessment of how does it promote or reduce extraneous load and promote germane load, or how does it cause extraneous cognitive load. Okay. All right. So with that being said, I took specifically Meyer and Moreno's 2013 framework, where they have a checklist, almost, right, of these principles that allows us to align learning. So let's go ahead and take a look. Here is this PowerPoint presentation. This is one slide. Now, I want to make some context and background first. This is not a beginner topic. This is usually taught at around week 12 of the 16-week semester. So up to this point, students, we have set the foundation of basic concepts. And in this stage, usually is where if students have a weak foundation or they're struggling with some of these basic concepts, when we get to this specific topic, when we have to retrieve that knowledge and apply it into a new context, we may have a little bit of issues, right? So I wanted to be very intentional and just choose something like this to help us, to help break it down, and then look at what are the good things about it in the multimedia Myers principles, right? And what are some areas that it may need to be improved. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look first and on specifically about which areas of this are in alignment with Myers and Myers principles, right? So coherence. Coherence is talking about whether or not this context, this content it makes sense, right? So I am providing relevant information that is directly connected to that topic, right? So this means that I'm not providing or adding information that is not associated with the specific topic of that slide. I'm avoiding unnecessary embellishments. So there is not flowers or colors that are not associated with the specific content. And this, because when I use embellishment, I could create extraneous cognitive load. So in terms of coherence, this slide would be acceptable, right? Let's talk about signaling, the signaling principle. And this is, can we have students make connections between their dual coding, right? So the visual and that text that is connected. So when we use distinct colors to label, right, and highlight key elements, it's an acceptable thing within these principles. So, for example, the fact that in this particular font, the blue font, it's connected directly to the molecular geometry. The red colors over here are connected to the electron geometry. So visually, students do not need to think or talk. I don't have to talk about it, but I am allowing them to have and make those connections by visually looking at it, right? So this is what the signaling is. This is not something that I have to be explicit in the way I mention for students to note, but I'm taking it's that area that is going to happen naturally because of the difference of choices in color. Isn't that interesting? I think it's really cool. Spatial continuity. So this is if I have my canvas, which is in this case is my slide, I want the text to be associated with the image. If there is an image, that it is very easy for me to make those connections. If I am expecting and presenting the information, here is the image, here is the text, and we have to make the cognitive load, right? This is about reducing extraneous cognitive load. How necessary in this context is it for us to have the text be connected to the image? If what we want is just to have that connections, because we're building up, when we pair them and put them together, we're allowing our brain to associate those. I see the picture, I see the text, and I don't have to think about it. If I don't have to think about it, does that make sense? Then I am reducing that cognitive load. If on top of being presented new information, I also have to think about how does this text connect with anything from that slide, we can cause that extraneous cognitive load. So looking back over here, we may notice that yes, while for example this image is right connected with here, there's some things that are going well, like I just mentioned, that are in alignment with that multimedia as theory, right? But what are some things that could be improved? And some potential cognitive load issues in this PowerPoint presentation. There is something that it is happening a lot, and it is that there is a split attention effect. So while we do have relevant text and we have relevant images, we have them separated from that text and visuals. So in some of them, it's okay, but having all of the text separated from every single one of these images, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We're asking the students to, like the matching, what does this text connect with this, right? How did this text connect with any of these images? Which one is relevant and which one is connected? So we may want to reorganize the information in order to not cause this split attention. We want the text to be in alignment with the visuals. Another element is interactivity. So, of course, this is an isolated slide, so it doesn't account the entire presentation. However, the slide itself, it could be the information could be relevant, right? But the interrelated concepts, for example, of electron and molecular geometry and how they impact the bond angles, may require a higher element of interactivity, so that we're not just exposing it, like it's not an expository tone where I'm just presenting the information, but since there is a foundation that the students have in order to comprehend this new content, we may want to present the information to where we allow them to interact and engage their previous understanding, retrieve that information and make connections, and this can lead to the germane cognitive load, which we do want, right? Perfect. So overall, when we look at these, there are some areas of improvement, and of course, there's also good things that are about it. And when I look at the slide, it looks clean. There is not unnecessary information. However, for example, something else that I didn't point out is what is the relevance of having this over here and how it's all connected. Now, mind you, like I say, of course, if you want to provide me feedback, I will love that. The practical application of these principles and how I am interpreting that I can arrange them is what I'm about to present, okay? And this is how an attempt to reorganizing information and how it is presented in order to have effective instructional design. So that I decided to separate that slide into two different slides so that we could focus on the two different aspects individually. I decided altogether that we were not going to bring up this guys over here just quite yet, okay? So when I look at these, there's a little bit of background to bring, and it is that I figure, well, in the lab component of the class, students are asked to fill out a worksheet with table like this, where students are adding information one by one. Simultaneously as a homework assignment, right, a formative assessment in this class, the students will work with a similar structure, right? By providing this structure, I'm wanting to guide students in the retrieval of that information first as we're building up, and it allows to make connections from previous chapters, from previous topics as we're introducing the new one, right? And then I decided to also have this separate part, which at the end we have to see what is the impact of having the lone pairs in the molecule and what does that do that is important as we build into more complex chemistry topics later on. So with these two slides, and of course you can go back to the video, pause it, study it, analyze it, test it out. Let's go ahead and look at the coherent signaling, spatial, the modality principles, and so and of these multimedia principles. So the slide is clear and free. We don't have extraneous information. It focuses solely on the impact of lone pairs. Something that I like is that we are also providing segments into an information logically, right? So this is going to manage that intrinsic cognitive load because we are asking the students to apply concepts that they learned throughout most of the class up to this point, right? So by presenting the information of table, like chunk by chunk and area by area, we can have them process one chunk of information at a time. After I make these changes, maybe even adding a numbering, right? So we know that in order, I know this presentation is not for chemists, but in order for us to figure out electron geometry and molecular geometry, step one is to draw the Lewis dot structure. So even as I am talking right now, which is something that I love about my neurodivergent brain, I have ADHD, is that ideas come to my mind, so I will definitely take notes. But it is that maybe I'm going to add numberings. Number 1, I'm going to draw the Lewis dot structure. Number 2, I'm going to assign electron groups. Number 3, I'm going to distinguish between lone pairs and bond pairs depending on those electron groups. Then I'm going to introduce electron geometry and what that means. And I'm going to talk about molecular geometry and what that means. We can also talk about bond angle. Something that I want to highlight as well is that students at this point, they have a handout of some of these images as well. So we have extra tools to make those connections. All right, so let me go back over here to that sequencing of coherence. All right, so signaling principle. So the use of arrows and different colors can help distinguish between ideal bond angles, and this is specifically related over here. The fact that we're showing the arrows, and this is in the image. If you notice on our previous image, we don't have time to highlight the distance and how this is the bond angle, because we have so many images that our attention cannot come to it, right? So the signaling principle, we're having the students do one thing at a time. Spatial continuity. So when I look at the text and the explanations, they're placed close and they're corresponding to these images, and this can reduce that visual scanning of what all of this is new, how is it all connected, and thereby it will decrease that extraneous cognitive load. So when I'm saying this is, I don't know, it's doing that. This is the ideal, what I'm expecting, this is the real. Now, of course, this is not PowerPoint presentation, so none of these are presented all at the time. You can do, where you do the actions one thing at a time, and you can pause. However, just adding the step-by-step animation on the PowerPoint is not enough, because if students are going to go back and review the materials and we're not using the presenting mode, the static image should be coherent for them to make these connections, right? When it comes to the modality principle, we're avoiding redundancy by not repeating the same information in the text and the narration, right? So we are assuming that there is a spoken part that is happening, and we're not repeating those words also in the text as I'm saying it, I'm presented it in the image. I do believe in my teaching practices to have students take notes. So if you notice, I am not adding narration into the image. So it does mean that I have to make sure that as I'm presenting information, students have, this presents an opportunity for them to take notes and add their observations as well. What are some issues that could come up? And it could be that while the slide it's effectively using visuals, the lack of textual description, so can you see that it's can help. However, we could potentially want to integrate more narrative in the presentation that allows for a spoken word. So if you notice over here, there's not a lot of room for a spoken word. So if I take it all the way in which I'm not looking at or adding any extra information, it is not as useful as a resource to study. So maybe in the previous slides, I'm going to present that information, or I'm going to make connections as to where we can find the text. But we don't want all of our information to be presented, for example, like this, without having any text for us to make those connections between the visuals and as well as the text that is presenting. So overall, this, I'm sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. So this portion, I'm just going to go over here. This alignment with Myers principle is a refining process. And this is the beauty of reflecting teaching practices. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to present it to my students. and if I can see and track whether they're following along, they're engaging with the content, they seem to be able to retrieve that information and that knowledge that they've had previously. That's part of that intrinsic cognitive load, right? But I'm doing it in a systemic manner that is guiding them while still having them do that work, then it's good. However, only until I go and teach this and I pay close attention of how it is received, then I can look back and see, is there anything else that I need to adjust? This is in theory what I expected to, I'm being intentional about how I'm presenting the information. I do have to be intentional about how I reflect on how the information was received, right? And whether extraneous cognitive load still took place, and then maybe decide what else am I going to do to help relieve that extraneous cognitive load, to promote germane load, and to address the fact that we are teaching a intrinsic extraneous cognitive load, right? So we have this intrinsic load with chemistry, and we can't get rid of it. So how are my activities leading, right? So we may want to make sure, for example, as we're going through this, what else am I going to have them do? A practice problem associated with applying, and we're modeling, we're engaging. We're going to go back and show, can I do this on my own without the step-by-step visual guide, right? So overall, what we're going to find is that we come to the end. Meyer's principles can enhance chemistry education through effective multimedia tool. So Meyer's principle allows us to evaluate multimedia. We've already established that multimedia really enhances the learning experience of our chemistry students. Now, looking back, there are a few changes that I can make. And as I'm making changes, and this is a work in progress, I can adjust it. I wanted to show how I can take my current materials, view it through the lens of multimedia and cognitive load theories, and make adjustments. So it's not about starting from scratch, but the taking back and reviewing and focusing and being intentional. Then I'm going to be able to assess the effectiveness of every single aspect of the information and how I'm presenting information to my students. What am I having them do with it, and how am I promoting and assessing and teaching them as they are? This is personalized instruction. Not because I'm taking out of the 80 students, every single student individually, characterize and analyze, and then decide how instruction works best for them. But it is a student-centered approach where I am understanding from evidence-based and research-based practices what is proven to be effective, and I'm applying it. What I love about these educational psychology principles into teaching is that I am addressing the human mind, and I am taking it into consideration first. Reflective practices bring that human component of, this is what I expect, or this is what we have seen our brains, how they learn best. Well, then what am I going to do now, right? And that is very important. Segmenting content and using clear signals and minimizing repetition can aid student learning. Bringing it into chunks. Another way to segmenting content is not necessarily that you're going to go from having 20 slides to having 100 slides. Perhaps I'm going to segment the content where, and this is something that I'm going to be working on over the next couple of months, is that maybe I present information in pre-lectures online, right, where I'm engaging students and I'm priming them, and then we come in class and this is what we're doing. So the segmenting of the content is not just about creating multiple slides, but it's about when and in which part of the learning am I in? Am I in the introduction of a new topic? Am I in the apply in the building skills stage. Where am I, right? Is this so then this is where formative assessment can come into place, and then I have a summative assessment where I have them bring it all in, right? Adaptation is necessary to accommodate diverse learning types. And now, mind you, this is not looking at neurodivergency, which is a very that today we get to know this more. Like I say, I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until last year, so in 2023, and it really has been eye-opening to get to understand myself better and understand that there is certain things that are just inherent with how my brain is built, and that is outside of just the habits that I have. I do have to be intentional about certain areas in order for make up to the things that my mind doesn't use naturally. For example, I thrive in structure. High structure allows me to have a sense of direction. However, creating high structure is very difficult for me. So if I have students, for example, that have ADHD, and I'm having them create this structure themselves, they may not be able to do it, right? And you're asking them to create the structure for their study sessions, to create the structures of how they're going to approach learning on their own, while also having to handle the intrinsic cognitive load of the subject matter. So when I provide the structure for them, I am relieving them from that cognitive load of figuring it out. They do have to be reflective and see what works and what doesn't work for them. But I'm presenting them with different opportunities. And I present information and learning in different opportunities. They get to know themselves better, how they learn, and what works better for them, right? Future research should explore long-term impact. This is important in some of the literature review that I've done. We've talking about one event only, right? So maybe I did this adjustment and I'm going to see how it impacted once. If I do a long-term analysis of the impact, I'm able to think about the multimedia applications, not just on the lens of the right now, but on the lens of the future. And I can find areas where the wealth of knowledge about these evidence-based practices that are effective for managing cognitive load are studied, understood, and expanded. Implementing these strategies to boost student engagement and comprehension, it's an ongoing refinement. You probably have opinions and ideas about what I just presented, and you could say, well, I actually would do it this way. And that is so cool about having an academic community where we can collaborate and grow, right? Having reflective teaching practices and not just saying, what was I good at? What was I challenging at? It's important. However, if I'm not tagging information, for example, if I have overall for this particular topic, maybe there are 30 slides, but I may change on one slide. That's fine. Tag it. Where else could you see the impact of that one change? And how did that one change cause something else? If I restructure everything, how do I know what worked and what didn't, right? So if I'm applying of all of the different multimedia principles, right, for reducing cognitive load, I'm choosing, I think that's something I can do. I'm going to put images and text together. Let's see how this impacts this extraneous cognitive load. That's awesome. Be intentional, right? Where do I look at the intentionality, and where do I evaluate the intentionality of my teaching practices? In the formative and summative assessments, right? In the homework, in the practice problems, in the clicker questions. How is it all connected? And how can I create the evidence that this change is effective? And then I replicate, right? And then I look at it and I change it. And then maybe 3 years from now, it doesn't work. Why? Because we have different learners, which is the beauty and the challenge of teaching, is that I'm teaching humans and our human mind, how we process information, while our brain as a organ, right, it's mechanic, it's the way it is, we really do have to base a lot on behaviors in order to understand that. And that's why psychology is a behavioral science, right? So we do have to look at the human component and get to understand it. Here are some of the references, and I did connect the different DOI so you can look at it. I love especially this specific 2024 Myers. He looked at his past, present, and future. This, to me, if you're interested in getting started with understanding multimedia learning and get a okay, so what is this about? How does it all work? I believe this particular reference, this particular article is very, very useful. I like this one as well, though, because it has practical tools. So what are 9 ways that I can reduce cognitive load in multimedia learning, right? And then if you're interested in how some people within our field in chemistry are implementing Myers multimedia principles, I have 2 different ones. I'm talking about video, and I also wanted to share about PowerPoint presentations, because we do use these tools, right? I think one of the challenge for videos is maybe this is the opportunity for us to seek funding and make connections between people who are good at making videos. We don't have to do it all, right? There is room for an interdisciplinary approach to the creation of educational videos where we can bring in the expertise of different fields, those that are experts at using the tool, those that are knowledgeable about the subject matter, and those that are knowledgeable about the education components and the instructional design component. And this triangular approach can lead for STEM videos to be high quality and for them to be considered to be suitable for cognitive load management. Thank you so much for dedicating the time to watching this presentation with me today. As you noticed, I also decided to use this, and this is called Prezi. So Prezi is a tool that you can use, and it's called Prezi.com, that you can use to help create a presentation like this. I love that it is able to create a narrow focus. So if I do have an image, I'm not asking, or I'm not talking, or I'm not using, but it allows us to create this notion where I can come in and zoom in. So maybe just doing presentations with a tool like this, where my eyes are moving along with the words, with the visual representations, it feels like a flow where my mind is not overwhelmed with all of the information that is presented, but I'm able to narrow and focus and engage in learning. So thank you so much for listening to me today. And once again, I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to share about this area that I am passionate about, if you can tell, and that I'm really engaging into the understanding it even more and developing and enhancing STEM education, an area that I believe is very important to me. And there's a reason why I'm bringing this image over here, is that I'm passionate about engaging students from minority and underrepresented groups, from students that are from diverse backgrounds, whether it will be financially speaking, where it will be from different educational backgrounds, and how do we bring everybody in, right? And how do I close achievement gaps, and how do I address and tailor learning, not just for those that are good at it, that gotta figure it out, feels like sometimes. Don't you feel that? You have some students that is almost effortless, that they just go through and engage into their own learning, and then you have those that are struggling. How can we help them? Well, there is in higher education, things are moving so fast that by the time you get to know their name better, by the time you feel that you're understanding them, we're almost halfway through the semester, and it is proven that by test 1, which is week 3 or week 4, some students have given up. So how do we engage them early on? And it can be punitive in the sense that we're scolding students into spending time learning. But how intentional we create the materials and the things that we ask of them can really lead for them to be engaged in their learning. It promotes resilience. And in learning science, you need resilience. It's not about being able to figure it out all at once by being presented to information once, but it's about being able to have the resilience to go through it. And cognitive load management and multimedia principles from Myers, I feel like it is so tactical and so intentional. And I've been able to see in just this very short time of implementing changes where I've gotten to see students that would have given up and that decided to not, regardless of the grade, which is important. Because yes, the grade is important, and there are systems in place for them to get a good grade. But what is more important is that when we have STEM students, and I teach freshmen most, they have a goal, they have a dream. And chemistry should not be the lock and key gatekeeper. It is important, yes. Why? Because of the problem-solving and critical thinking skills it develops. Not just the foundation of the knowledge itself. If you notice, a lot of majors only ask for General Chemistry 1. And the chemistry that they learn there, it's not enough to understand and explain the world around you. So why are we learning it? Because there is something about the intrinsic cognitive load that chemistry offers that when being intentional, it can serve a purpose, a great proper purpose for the human development and professional development of different areas of knowledge. But the subject matter itself won't do it. It's how I teach it, how I engage students into it, what will make the difference. And this is why I love instructional design, because it's about being intentional, creating systems in place where I'm not struggling to identify why my students are not learning. The why my students are not learning, it's a question that I can answer because I've been intentional on what all of the activities are, right? So a test is not just a bunch of questions I put together, but the test is very intentional. What questions I ask to see where we're at. And also the small formative assessments also coming into place, right? Where I'm building skills throughout the way, but I'm going to tag it and follow it and then be intentional. Anyway, I could talk about this all day. I am very, very excited. Once again, thank you so much. And I can't wait to hear your feedback, especially when I talked about those tools and how I made changes. This is beautiful where we can collaborate and get those ideas and apply it and then refine it, change it, collaborate, and move forward. Have a good one.